no farmer wants to kill his land or her land. You talk to farmers, they are stewards of the landscape. So right from the base all the way through to the global food companies that put a lot of the products on our shelves.
We need to rethink our relationship with food. Agri-food systems are at the center of many global challenges: climate change, resource depletion, waste, and even malnutrition and obesity. To address these issues, we need innovative solutions across the entire food supply chain, from farm to fork. This is where EIT Food comes in. EIT Food, the European Institute of Innovation and Technology, is a knowledge and innovation community supported by the European Union, dedicated to making our food systems more sustainable. Their approach is inclusive, empowering both growers and consumers to participate in creating a better and healthier world. As the largest and most dynamic food innovation community globally, EIT Food connects stakeholders across the food system to inspire new ideas and drive meaningful change. Their mission is to transform the way food is produced, distributed, and consumed, adding greater value to European society through collaboration between industry, education, research partners, and engaged citizens. At the Concordia Annual Summit in New York City, we had the opportunity to sit down with Richard Zaltzman, CEO of EIT Food, to discuss one of the key pillars of this transformation: regenerative agriculture. This approach enhances biodiversity, improves soil health, and strengthens ecosystems, building resilience against climate change and extreme weather. At the heart of it all is healthy soil, because as Richard reminds us, when you take care of your soil, it will take care of you. Regenerative agriculture offers a future where we can achieve higher yields without the environmental destruction, creating a more productive and sustainable way to feed the world. Well, welcome back to the Green Hour. We are sitting here at the Concordia Annual Summit in New York City during Climate Week. I'm sitting here with Richard Zaltzman, CEO of EIT Food. Richard, thank you so much for being with us.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
So I think the first thing that I want to ask you is, what is EIT Food? What's your mission and what is the work that you're currently doing?
Yeah, we are Europe's largest food innovation agency. So we're an EU body that's really focused on transformation in the food sector. And really in three areas. The first is net zero food systems across all of the dimensions. Let's not just zero in on carbon. So when we think about net zero food systems, multiple dimensions: water, biodiversity, nitrogen, carbon too. We focus on healthy lives through food. So really improving health outcomes through people's diets and the choices and the availability of the food they have. And thirdly, building a resilient and fair food system. So how do we change the food system so that everyone has access to high quality nutrition universally and in a way that makes the food system resilient overall?
So it sounds like all three of those things. On one element, you have the economic piece, right?
Yep.
You want to make things affordable for people.
Yeah.
You're looking at net zero, looking at carbon, making sure that we're doing what we need to do to fight climate change. And then you're looking at social as well with healthier lives. So I think you're bridging all of those together, which in sustainability is something we always strive for.
Absolutely. Yeah, look, these three things are inextricably linked. So if you take food system resilience, you can't have societal impact through food and make sure people can eat healthy food every day unless the food system is resilient. And the food system can't be resilient at the moment unless it is based on sustainable principles, i.e. net zero, soils that are healthy, soils that sequester carbon, environments that secure water in the landscape, etc. So these three missions are by design very much integrated.
Well, I'm glad we're having this conversation, especially considering, I wrote the note down that global food system emissions contribute, give or take 30%, right, of the world's GHG emissions. So it's very needed. And I think the work of EIT Food is something that people can look at Europe and kind of take outside as well.
Yeah, look, we'd hope so. And I think it'd be naive to say something that works in Europe is going to work in North America, or something that works in Africa is immediately going to work in Asia. So there is a local dimension to food. And we're doing a big initiative on regenerative transition that really focuses on the landscape. And we're hoping we find archetypes that we can move around. If you have a a high water stress grain crop landscape in Spain, we hope that what you do there to make that regenerative might port to the similar landscape in the US, but you've got to recognize the social dynamics, the economic dynamics, the subsidies, the culture is going to be different wherever you land. And it's very important we work across the breadth of those factors in a transition.
Well, it's interesting because, so I live in the U.S., I live in North Georgia, and to your point on, it's hard to replicate things from Europe into the U.S. I mean, in my day-to-day job, I run a recycling program, and our company is a global company, and we have someone that runs the recycling program in Europe as well. But it's different because in Europe, this is a little bit off topic, but, landfills aren't as prevalent. Yeah. And in the US, they are.
I think this is a really interesting point to kind of swing between the topic.
Right.
Look, there's things that you can do with policy. So if we look at European recycling policy, that drove this change. Originally, we were landfill-based 30, 40 years ago. Various directives said no more to landfill. We've done waste to energy. Sure. And now I think Europe's recycling system is realizing waste to energy is still a linear process. How do we make this a circular process? And at the same, so policy helps, right? Unequivocally, good policy helps. But that doesn't mean you can't do anything without good policy. And I think what we're seeing now is an increasing momentum from companies who realize, in particular in the food system, if they wait for policy to make the moves on a food system that is going to provide them with the ingredients they need for the next 50 years, they could be dead. Mm-hmm. So, a resilient food system can very much be accelerated through good policy, but it's in the company's interest right through that value chain to make sure they invest in it now. And we're seeing that from the big global corporates all the way through to the farmers themselves. No farmer wants to kill his land or her land. You talk to farmers, they are stewards of the landscape. So right from the base all the way through to the global food companies that put a lot of the products on our shelves, it's in everyone's interests. We'd love to see more policy helping that, but the absence of policy doesn't mean an absence of movement.
We talk about killing the land per se, and I would ask you the term of regenerative agriculture. Right. Obviously we're going to have a big segment on this in a second, but my question to you is, what's your viewpoint on regenerative agriculture, and the importance that it brings to the farmers themselves?
Okay, I get asked a lot. Where's the definition of regenerative agriculture? Right. What are the metrics we should be measuring? How do we know we're getting there? And ultimately, it's about soil health. And yes, we can measure soil health in many, many different ways. But actually, what we're trying to advocate for is right now trying to measure with precision exactly what that means is difficult, because soil health on a broadly upward trend is still going to fluctuate. If like we've had horrific floods recently in Europe, those are going to wash out a lot of the nutrients from the soil. But if you continue with the practices that are improving it steadily, that soil will become healthier and healthier over time and will be able to absorb catastrophic events like a flood in the future better. So I think everyone's looking, or many organizations are looking for this perfect definition of regenerative. It's not going to exist. There's never going to be one, because regenerative arable farming is quite different to regenerative mixed farming, is different to regenerative cattle farming. And I know there's going to be people hitting your social thread saying there's no such thing as regenerative cattle farming, or there's purists at each end of the scale. What we're advocating for is let's build direction in the areas we know are going to improve things towards healthy soils, resilient farms, resilient communities, and gradually that regenerative process will take us back to a situation where the food system can ride out the ebbs and flows of most of the shocks that climate change is going to throw at it.
So one of the pieces of work that you are focused on, I think I read an article, maybe it was released in April of this year, earlier this year, the Regenerative Innovation Portfolio. Yeah. And I'll ask you if you could just speak on this, what is this portfolio? But to me, what I wrote down is a lot of it's about just, spreading education, right? And then looking at the farmers themselves, because the farmers themselves are the people that are going to make large scale change.
Yeah. Look, we recognize this is not going to happen without the farmers. So the concept of the Regenerative Innovation Portfolio was to identify landscapes of interest where we can bring companies together because they source different things, but from the same area, and then engage farmers in those areas to say, look, let's work with you on training, on agronometric advice to support you through that transition. And the companies put money on the table. We put some money on the table to support that training and that transition over a number of years. including in some cases supporting the farmers with investment in their land for practices that they do. So we build that farmer base, and often it's pioneering farmers. These are really brave people who say, yeah, I'm going to put up my hand and step into these types of programs. Increasingly, we see farmers who bring other farmers on board, and that's one of the most powerful things. We work with amazing organizations like Climate Farmers who are real advocates for the farmer-to-farmer network and transition. So we start with the farmers. We build a cohort in a landscape that will work on a regenerative transition over a number of years. And then we're supporting that transition with a number of pieces of really critical work. How do we valorize ecosystem services? Or less jargon. How do we bring money in to really pay for the peripheral benefits, the positive externalities that farmers generate? Improved water quality, better water retention, lower flood risk, higher air quality, stronger biodiversity. Haven't mentioned the C word, of course, carbon. Carbon comes in, many companies want the carbon, but actually you look at that basket of services that a great steward of the land can provide, and we're trying to find ways to bring that to life and bring money into the farmers. We're looking at how do you re-engineer the supply demand of that landscape, and also how do we find innovative ways to de-risk this transition for the farmers. So push that risk outside the farm gate. Most of the risk today sits behind the farm gate. We want the value chain to share that risk, and we're looking at how do we innovate finance so that we push that risk outside of the farm gate. So those three things underpin the longer term transition in any given landscape.
Well, I bring this up in a lot of podcasts, but this term or phrase of systems thinking.
Yeah.
And systems thinking, I work in product circularity, so we're always thinking about how can we manufacture a product or research and develop a product from the beginning that we can use in after its useful life. But the same thing's here with systems thinking. I mean, going to the farmers, the stakeholder engagement, right? Bringing in financing, and then you're basically elevating Europe's food system overall. So it's not just, you're not just working with these, one-off farmers or whoever it is, but what this could bring in, let's say 10 years, is something that's incredible.
Completely. We're moving away from bilateral relationships in a landscape to try to build landscape concepts. So today, let's think about finance, right? Today, if you speak to an agricultural bank, most of the work they do is on a bilateral arrangement. They will loan a farmer for a machine like a no-till drill, €250,000 to €500,000, but it's a basic collateralized loan and it's debt on the farmer one-to-one. Actually, if you look at that landscape, the farmer can share that drill with others, and the finance could be backed off against a multi-party offtake agreement. So instead of just the farmer selling their wheat to one party, if they could get 15 years surety of a number of crops, plus their biodiversity improvement, plus their water improvement, then suddenly you're looking at this at a landscape level and saying there's 5,000 farmers in that landscape, and collectively they can produce all of these things, crops and ecosystem services. And then there's an ecosystem of value chain actors, the distributors, the machinery sellers, input providers where they are necessary, the banks, the insurers. And on the other side, you're connecting them in a multi-party way. And that is a very, very different system to the one we have today, which is, as you're a circularity expert, is linear. It's a very, very linear system.
Right. Well, to me, it's like, I mean, you can look at something like you're saying, and here's what we can do in 15 years of time. Your soil health will be exponentially better, water quality, all of these things can be better. But how do you, I would say maybe, sell that to these farmers of regenerative agriculture when, they almost have to have a little bit of faith, right? Yeah. That in 15 years, this is going to happen.
This is the question, right?
Yeah.
So I think we've benefited from some really brave pioneer farmers over the last 10 years who've said, yep, we'll do this. And you look at something like Groundswell, the regen farming community in the UK, started by some super brave pioneers, but now that's become a sold out festival pretty much every year. The movement behind this is growing. It's going to take more than just the movement to build the full scale transition, but we see these pioneer farmers' voice is rising, and others are looking at them and saying, there's a different model we could follow here. So it's building trust, building the voice of those pioneers who are prepared to do this, and then gradually bringing people in. I get a lot of questions from the corporate world. How do we speed this up? How do we go faster? That is a real challenge because, number one, we go around the sun at the same speed every year, right? So every every farmer's on that same annual cycle, certainly in the, in the Northern Hemisphere, in the European context, in the American context, it's an annual cycle of planning and sowing and nurturing and harvesting. And that you cannot intercept the speed of that. You can't speed that up. So this commitment is really critical. We don't have a secret sauce for this other than get moving now. Like, now is the time to start. Don't wait for tomorrow, because it's not going to get any quicker tomorrow. We are encouraging the companies to back this, and therefore with their support, farmers feel, okay, I've got some financial support to do this. I'm de-risking my choices. They will step in with the right training, with the right support, and gradually or steadily we build that momentum.
When looking about like building the momentum and speeding things up, a thought just came to me. I went to school in Kentucky, in the U.S., and a company there was developing vertical farming, like in big facilities, vertical farming, and they were selling crops to local grocery stores, and I think maybe even larger grocery stores. How is that pretty prevalent in Europe, or with the work that y'all do with vertical farming?
Okay, so we've had quite a few vertical farming startups come through us.
Right.
Look, if you look at the investment in high tech farming like vertical farming, it went boom and then it went crunch.
Yeah.
Mainly because of the energy demand of the vertical farms. Does that mean vertical farming is dead? Absolutely not. There's a huge role to play for farming in different environments. Vertical farming being one that works in the urban environment really well. Personally, I'd love to see this move beyond kind of salads and herbs. And really for the innovation arena to look at how does vertical farming or high-tech farming produce the kind of volumes of nutrition that we're going to need in complement to farming in the open spaces. And I think it's very much complementary, where you've got a complex but maybe high energy opportunity landscape. Let's look at vertical farming or indoor farming, or the way you haven't, how do we optimize for space outside? How do we optimize for water in the traditional farming environment? The two are complementary. It's definitely not an either or.
So when we talk about, if we go back to the economic kind of incentive or economic cost of regenerative farming or regenerative agriculture, could you speak to that a little bit as well?
Yeah, of course. Okay, so in some landscapes, farmers can benefit reasonably quickly or very quickly from the reduction of their input costs. And, there are large corporates who are supplying inputs of fertilizer, pesticides, herbicides, whose business model is based on lots of farmers using lots of these chemicals. They cost a lot of money. As farmers reduce their dependency on those inputs, they immediately add a lot of margin per hectare to the work that they're doing. If you get that right, then immediately those farmers are more profitable. And so the wheel starts spinning. That does not work for every crop system. So again, this is something we're testing, is how do you build different economic models for different crop systems? Some are really going to need to see that income from other ecosystem services, hence why we focus on that in the portfolio. If a farmer's going to earn, I don't know, 50 euros a hectare for water management, well, that might be the difference between profitable and not profitable. You then add on maybe a biodiversity impact from that, and suddenly, actually, they are genuinely profitable. So we're looking at how you make the markets for those additional value adds to what the farmer is doing. There's a lot of talk about how do we invest the money needed for the transition. Actually, yes, we need farmers to be able to access working capital and equipment funding better. We also got to think about the whole value chain. So as you shorten supply chains, we need really innovative digital solutions to shorten those supply chains, allow farmers to trade between each other. We need probably different cold storage. We're going to need more localized equipment. There's a huge opportunity for drone tech, digital high data solutions. So when we talk about investment in this, there's a lot of investment opportunities outside the farm gate. There's many inside the farm gate, but the fundamental engine is around farmer profitability. And that's something we really, really focus on. Some of that comes not day one, but year one. And the rest we've got to work on and really prove.
So final question I'll ask you on regenerative agriculture. Let's say I'm a startup, and I'm interested in working, with you and in the organization. What would I do to work with you?
Yeah, so we get a lot of startups come to us, and there are many accelerators in Europe and in the US that support startups. I think the first thing is really understand your market, right? How do you play in the regenerative space, and what's your value proposition to a farmer? If you're bringing innovative soil measuring technology, really understand the farmers that you're going to be working with. And we can support startups. We actually have a program of test farms where we can bring startups onto farms with farmers who are willing to test that technology and say, okay, this will work for me, this will not work for me. So this is, I think any investor here will say the same to a startup, but you've really got to know your market. And I would say regenerative agriculture is still a very broad term. Essentially, it's a set of practices that improve soil health and improve resilience. There's many, many opportunities for startups to work in this space. But the secret to getting that right, the open secret, is really understand how farmers are going to go through that transition. And what do you bring to them? What's the value to them?
So final segment, I'd say topic that I'd like to talk to you about is it's all around sustainability data, or environmental data, I should say. I mean, this is huge right now. Yeah. When looking at companies, a lot of companies have net zero targets, right? Data is so important. But you actually, I think it was in August, a news release came out with EIT Food and Foundation Earth on a new alliance to develop and test standards for the environmental impact data of food. Could you talk a little bit about this alliance and what you hope to accomplish?
Yeah, look, Foundation Earth have been going for 4 years now. They've been doing some really innovative and hard yards on understanding what does it take to build a credible environmental understanding of the impact of food when it reaches the shelves. And this is something everybody really wants to see, is a trustworthy system whereby if a food says, I'm more sustainable than another product, that you and I as a consumer, when we go to the shelves, can trust that information. So Foundation Earth have been working in our ecosystem for a long time to develop a really strong life cycle analysis process. But now we're trying to broaden that out and make sure that we can bring kind of a unity to the multiple different methods of doing this, and at least reach a common understanding of the standards that are required in order to be able to put a trustworthy label of some form on a product, or provide information about those products that consumers can say, okay, I'm going to make a choice. I'm going to buy this one versus that one because of the environmental impact it has. There's also a lot of debate about, do we combine environmental with nutritional data? We're keen that the precision on environmental data is not lost. But obviously, we also want consumers to be really, really clear about what they're seeing. And this, again, is an area where we need innovation. Everyone's got an opinion on this. I know, again, I'm sure you're going to get a lot on this on social. Right. So at the moment, we want to just build an understanding of what is needed through this alliance, build some common momentum to saying, yes, it's really important that this data is trusted by people every day when they do their shop, and that is then used to make different choices. And if we can get those three things in place, an understanding of what is needed, people trust that data, and then they make different choices, then we're getting there. Is that the same label on every piece of food? Probably not. But it's more build the broad momentum and consensus is where we want to get to with this alliance, or this point in time.
Well, I'm interested to see how it's going to look, especially with food having the nutrition label. What will you do with the environmental label as well? But Richard, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Cheers.